Welcome to All Systems Ergo, a human factors and ergonomics podcast delving into the fascinating world of healthcare. My name is Fran Ives and I am a chartered human factors specialist. I'm naturally curious about people, and throughout this series I want to explore different areas of healthcare human factors and the people who work in this diverse discipline. So my guest today is Laura Pickup, who is Head of Human Factors at an NHS Trust and also works as an independent consultant. Laura started life as a physiotherapist in the East Midlands, and it was during this time that she was introduced to the world of human factors and ergonomics. And this started a career in human factors, which has seen her work in the rail industry, as an academic, a national investigator at HSIB, an independent consultant, and now working back in an NHS trust. So with such a wealth of experience, I'm really keen to learn about her journey and her current mission to bring together and better support human factors specialists embedded in healthcare organisations. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, you started life as a physiotherapist. So how did you then discover the world of ergonomics and human factors?
It does seem a strange leap, especially when you end up in the railway industry. But no, it it's not that far away, really. I was really fortunate. Just the trust that I worked in at the time, which was Nottingham, Sue Hignett had very boldly, I think, convinced the trust that what they really needed was an ergonomist. And so that was really new. I mean, we're talking late 90s, early 2000s, really then. So she had carved that path and carved that department, and I was fortunate to just do a rotation there. And I think what you find, I'm sure other people have said this, is if you've therapists, when you train, it's very goal setting, problem solutions, working with people. It's not always that far away from what we end up doing sort of in human factors and ergonomics. So I think it really resonated with me, and I really like the idea of enabling clinicians in their work and environment, having been that clinician and sometimes struggled or been challenged. It did resonate with me. So yeah, it was a really good introduction. And then of course Sue said, well, you need to go and do the masters. So off I went, did the masters, then worked with John Wilson, and he very much brought human factors into the railway industry, and so I was working with him through that period of time. So yeah, it does seem a strange leap, but
so was it working with John Wilson then that helped you make that transition from healthcare into rail?
Yeah, I suppose so. I do remember my words. It's like, well, I'll do it for a year, John. And I think it was 15 years. It's like a classic line, isn't it? But anyone who knew John, he was quite, he was very enthusiastic about everything. And I just didn't get it initially, but after a while, after about my 60th signal box, I think, or control room, started to get that energy and that enthusiasm, really. But it was good for me, in terms of then transitioning into a career, different profession in human factors. It was a really good break, and it was an opportunity to learn in an environment that I didn't know, and I had to learn very much about the industry. But I think it was also a really good learning curve for how you get human factors into industries or different organisations, because that's what was going on really at that time. Not that I probably fully appreciated at the time, but when looking back now, you can see it.
It's quite a leap, isn't it, to go to a different industry? And from my perspective, when I was at university, I did my year in industry and automotive. Then I graduated and went into nuclear, and after a couple of years I then came into healthcare. Never really a plan. There was there was no thinking behind it. No. It was just really a case of, that job's come up. I did a couple of years in nuclear, knew it wasn't maybe where I wanted to be forever. Job in healthcare came up. I'll have a go at that. And sort of nearly 20 years later, I'm still here. And I think there's a reason why I'm still here, because healthcare is it draws you in. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
The thought of moving to another industry now for me feels really, really daunting. I can only imagine for you, having come through that healthcare route of physio and then ergonomics and human factors, to then go into rail was something that you probably would never have predicted when you started out in your physio training.
No, wasn't in the plan at all. And I think what happened was when I moved, my intention was to go back into healthcare. I'd go and do my
Right.
master's and I'd go back into
Yeah.
healthcare. And I think people do that, and that would have been fine. I'd probably gone back in and been very physical and done
Yeah.
much more physical
Yeah.
ergonomics.
Yeah.
What happened was, though, after Sue was there, and I did go back, I think, for a period of time while she went off and wrote a PhD up, and I did a bit for her
Mm.
then. But there weren't any jobs.
Right.
So it became very clear very quickly that there was no
Mm.
pathway or no route really in. But the other thing that happened, I think, was while I was doing more of the railway work and different areas of work, you begin to realize the breadth of human factors and ergonomics. So I was
Mm.
naturally physically trained, I suppose, as a physio, and so got the
Yeah.
biomechanics and got that side of things. But the cognitive world was very new to me.
Mm.
And I loved that. I loved learning about that, and I did quite a
Mm.
lot in the field of like mental workload in the railway industry, and it
Mm.
was just a whole new opportunity. And I think,
Mm.
I don't know whether you found this, but for me, and John just going, well, go and do it, go and do it, go and try. And I was like, well, where's this going? Where's this going? Sort of thing. But
Yeah.
actually, just doing everything and a bit of anything and all of it,
Mm.
you become that much broader, I think, and
Yes.
whole sort of practitioner. I'm not saying that
Yes.
I'm good at everything of all those bits, but the point is,
Mm.
I think now in the roles that I'm in, you can be a generalist to some degree
Yeah.
across many parts, and of course you'll be better and specialized in
Mm.
others. But for career progression, it did me a lot of good to get out of my comfort zone and
Mm.
yeah, go and explore it really. So yeah, no, it was good. It was good, but yes, not predicted.
I think one of the nice things about stepping out or moving into an industry where human factors is perhaps a little bit more established is that you often have the opportunity to work with teams,
Yeah,
which is a really unusual thing to be
yeah,
able to do in healthcare. And I don't think I really appreciated at the time
yeah,
the wonderful team that I worked with in the nuclear industry, you know, a
yeah,
mixture of psychologists and
yeah,
engineers who had moved into human factors. And as a new graduate, that was just brilliant
yeah,
because I had
yeah,
that support, but also I learned an awful lot from their own interests and their own experiences. And I think had I come into healthcare as a new graduate without having that,
yeah,
I would have probably floundered,
yeah, yeah,
because I wouldn't have had that sort of that base. I wouldn't have had that team for support.
yeah,
And there were so many more transferable elements than I know immediately sort of
yeah.
realised. I sort of thought, oh, I'm moving from nuclear to healthcare. It's just completely different. Yes, they're completely different industries, but an awful lot of what I had done in those two
Yeah,
years in the nuclear industry really did set me
to
up.
fit. And I think you're right. I think exactly the same. I worked with similar people, oxics and engineers, and you learn their world and you learn where the
Mm.
overlap is,
Yeah.
but you also learn why people think like they think. And these are the guys that we've got to work with, and they become our MDT, don't they?
Mm.
Multidisciplinary teams
Mm.
in certain
Mm.
areas.
Yeah.
And I think the thing for me in healthcare is I always describe it as it's basically many industries under one roof,
Yeah.
because you might be sort of working with radiology or in an MRA unit in one area, which could be much more process and perhaps
Mm.
engineered sort of world, really. And then you might be working sort of in an area where you're bringing a piece of kit in, and the clinical engineers are critical. And when you work with the clinical engineers and those that bring in the products to healthcare, you start to resonate with the world that you were in when you were with
Mm.
more engineering guys, because
Yeah.
so it depends where you work. And then you've got the soft interactions of people with people, then that's
Yeah.
really different again. So healthcare sort of, to me, I mean, that's true of many industries, but it's got all of the elements, like you say, that you've picked up along the way with the other industries,
Mm.
but it seems to be all under one roof. So
Yeah.
it's like that makes it really, I think, rich, challenging,
Yes. Mm.
and there's so many opportunities. But if you haven't had that breadth,
Mm.
it's about building that breadth, isn't it? And you can do that in healthcare, I think. Um,
Mm.
but the other industry experience, I think, possibly helps as well. But
Mm.
I think you can do it in healthcare, and that's the idea of sort of supporting people. Those of us who have
Mm.
done different things, I think
Mm.
we can support those coming through now, can't we?
Mm. I think one of the challenges that we have now is because there is no undergraduate degree,
Yeah,
people like me who did that many moons ago came out as an ergonomist, but
yeah,
with no particular bias to any sort of industry. So, like I
yeah,
alluded to,
yeah,
it's a case of where is there a graduate
Should I
job? I'll still go anywhere, any
Yeah.
industry. Give me a job.
Yeah.
And then sort of over time, I think you then find your place in the world, in whichever
Yeah.
industry or consultancy that might be. For people now, because they're coming through the MSc route, they tend to have had a first career
Yeah.
and then coming into human factors and ergonomics. And I see a lot of brilliant people who've been in the NHS doing various roles go and do their MSc because they've developed an interest in human factors and then come back into healthcare. So the brilliant thing is that they're bringing lots of healthcare experience, but I wonder whether we're sort of missing something because they don't have experience of human factors in other industries, and whether that is a negative for us.
Mm. I think that's where if we can get people working together, because I think what happens with, if you've worked in healthcare and like you say, you do that master's or whatever qualification, and then you come back in, what you are rich in is how to get things done in healthcare. You'll know the industry,
Yeah.
like any industry,
Yeah.
and I keep saying this, doing the do, getting it done, actually that's a massive part of the job in
Yeah.
healthcare. How do you do
Yeah.
this stuff? On the flip side, like you say, you may not have the breadth of always thinking. So I always use device design as an example. In healthcare, it's not inherent in our bones to think we will make sure that the interfaces are beautifully designed to not trip people up. It doesn't really work like that, particularly at the moment in healthcare.
Yeah.
We bring it in and then we try and adapt it, and if we can't do that, we work really hard at adapting our staff to do it. So we know that, don't we?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you've worked like that for so long, it's hard to see it any other way. It's hard to challenge that thinking. So I think that's the only thing. But I think it's very powerful when you get the two coming together. And I think, even if you are someone who's healthcare, do the masters, come back in and want to be that human factors professional, if you've got someone mentoring you or with you who's, can help just sense check what you're saying, what you're thinking, and think outside the box a little bit more, then I think it can work. But you're right, I think we need both. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think we have to just understand sort of what challenges there are for both of those people in those situations, really. But it's I'd encourage anybody, I do encourage anybody regularly to think about it, because we're going to need so many more people.
Yeah, absolutely.
This knowledge.
And was it that recognition that we needed more people that encouraged or prompted you to come back into healthcare from rail? I know you said one of the reasons why you stayed in rail was because there were no opportunities in healthcare. So was it that there just were more things out there that made you think, do you know what, now's the time?
When I came back, so I did some work, I think 2009 which was the National Patient Safety Agency at the time. So there was a few things there, but then the landscape changed, as you all know. So that sort of disappeared. And then it was 2015, I decided, you know what, I'll have to go consultancy, set myself up, because I'm not seeing any other opportunities. So managed to do that. And again, you're, very grateful to consultants that saw the value and brought you into a trust. That's generally how it worked, and it did work, and it was good. But you're right, I think in the last, I would say, 10 15 years, we have seen a significant shift. So I was fortunate, I think, that I got in when I got in, could get myself back up to speed with where healthcare was in the landscape, sort of thing. And then you're right, jobs have started to come. And they're coming because I think there have been people who have gone before us, and I think a few of us, been able to champion it, but there've been some loud voices in that space. But now there's also that volume of noise at the national level saying, actually, this has been a value for, built design, for example. We've got now in NHS England, haven't we, got human factors practitioner there. We've got people in the investigation field. We've got people in those national arenas that help, I think, trusts see that there is some value. But, I think it's getting better. But as you know, we are still finding it hard, either trusts that have said, yes, we need it and want it, to recruit to them to the level of experience that's needed. If you're going to lead something and push it forward, that's hard. Plus those who are perhaps sitting in a trust and organisation who have a qualification in human factors or ergonomics, but are not recognised for it or not used by organisations with it. And, like I think we've said, haven't we, a number of times, you need it would be great if trusts could just seek them out, find them,
Yeah.
find these people, or these people put themselves forward, which I think they have and they try, but it's not easy. So I think we have some capability. We're probably not using all of the capability that we have, but we definitely need to build more as well. So yeah, it's so for me, coming back was something I always had in my mind to do. But I joke it's taken 23 years, for the job to be advertised that I thought I would come out after my masters and do. So it's not a bad career plan, is it? Just wait, only 3 years.
A certain amount of patience required there, I think.
Maybe. I've done quite a lot in between, so it's all good.
And one of the things you have done is work as a national investigator for HSIB.
Yeah.
So how in that role were you able to apply your human factors knowledge and thinking?
Yeah. So I remember going for that job and thinking, oh, have I actually done investigations in the past? And then when you realise, when you start to do it, you think actually a lot of what we do when we do reviews of an area or of something that's gone wrong, it systems thinking, the systems approach that human factors, underpins human factors and the principles, does assist, I believe, in my opinion, healthcare learning investigation, safety learning investigations, because I think it meets what healthcare is trying to do now, which is learn, not blame.
Yeah.
And when you start to look at the system and the context and why things make sense at the time, which we do from the physical perspective and the cognitive perspective, with that science that sits behind all of those things, then I think it's a natural bedfellow really to making sense of, why people do what they do or function as they function. And I think it informs. I think it's a useful science, safety science, really, to inform the way we look at healthcare. And I also think we learn, don't we, many different methods, many different techniques. Yeah. And we're very familiar with looking at different types of systems. So I think, again, it allows you to acknowledge and recognize what type of system we're actually interrogating or investigating. Yeah. And then start to go, well, actually, the theories that sit behind, I was going to say, but barrier control analysis, for example, is relevant here, so actually we've got methods that help us look at systems like that. Why don't we use them? Why don't we visualize them? So I think there's a number of things. I think it's the basic principles of systems thinking. I think it's the theories that sit behind cognition and physical interactions and general interaction system informs healthcare investigations. And then I'm a bit of a lover of methods and tools, but I like the visualization of things. And I think healthcare, in my experience, values that. When you work as a group or you sit in a room, if you've got a number of people, they may vary significantly from administrative staff, nursing staff, therapy staff, healthcare staff, clinical engineers. You've got a massive group of people with very different mindsets and views. So for me, I think human factors has a way, an approach of managing all of those different stakeholders and users. And so but I probably would say that, wouldn't I, because I went into it as an investigator with that behind me. But then again, you learn a lot in terms of what investigation looks like and good investigation looks like. And I worked with some very talented people who have done a lot of investigations in different ways in different times. So it's I think you like to think, you give and you take, don't you, in those roles, sort of thing. And I think I probably did both of those at that time. But it was a good experience. Fascinating to see the healthcare system from the front line to the top of the system and what that looks like.
That job must have given you huge exposure to the NHS generally, and I think that's really useful for us as human factors specialists. And one of the reasons why I stepped out of a role that I had loved for 15 years was because I was really conscious that my NHS experience was limited to one NHS trust, and I wanted to just understand and learn a little bit more about the wider NHS. So I have done that, but it's still sort of really confined to the West Midlands region, whereas your role at HSIB would have given you huge exposure to all sorts of different organisations and systems, which is, I'm guessing, hugely beneficial to any of the work you do now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's been helpful to see why we inherit, or why frontline staff get what they get and work as they work, because ultimately the wider system, like you say, and the external sort of influencers play a huge part. They can't control that and they can't influence it, but they inherit it. And the challenges and the constraints, they balance brilliantly, constantly juggling and trading off a number of things on day-to-day life. But when you look at it, like you say, when you understand sort of where some of that's coming from, it's a lot further away from where they are at that time. And at a national level, I think it was a good experience to see that and see how those organizations work and their constraints as well. It's very, there were challenges. I was there during COVID as well, so we were doing, so it came before and after. So there are challenges. And I think that's where having worked in another industry comes into play, because you can see some of the challenges compared to those other industries where the regulatory framework might not be quite so complex. The way that engineering works and the commitment to reliability of certain products and areas in engineering may not be as apparent in healthcare, really. So like you say, but you can understand it. You can't do anything about it necessarily, but you can understand where the constraints and the challenges are coming from, and therefore sometimes some of the real frustrations, I think, in the system, really. But it's been good to go back now into organization and see what it looks like and how it feels there. Start to join the dots. I'm not sure I've got the answers, I really haven't, but I can see how it
I'm not sure any of us have got the answers, but I suppose one of the things that I think is quite exciting at the moment that you're trying to do is to kind of scoop up all of those embedded HF practitioners that are sometimes quite hidden away in organizations. And whilst you said I don't have all the answers, they're probably also thinking I don't have all the answers, but collectively we might together be able to pool that knowledge, learn from one another, and help each other out. So what was the motivation for starting this?
Well, I'd like to say, it's purely selfish. No, it wasn't. It is like that. You say, though, you are a lone wolf quite a lot of the time, aren't you, as a human factors professional and practitioner, whatever, in the area that you go into. And I realised that when I first came back into healthcare. Well, you were obviously working in healthcare. We were all in little areres across the country and not necessarily aware of each other's and what we were all doing. And I think I came to realise, that the strength, really, as you say, is not people haven't necessarily got the answers, but the point is you can problem solve together. And where there have been successes, you can take from that and learn from it, and hopefully try and implement things, because actually getting things in to healthcare sometimes can be quite challenging, because it's a vast industry, vast organizations that we're talking about, and no one organization is going to be the same as another. So I think it was, it's just having that opportunity to sense check, but for myself and share anything that anyone would like, me to share, I'm happy to do that. But equally also learn from those people that have really, done it before as well. And I think there's also a real recognition as soon as you went in. So when I started in the railway industry, there was a few number of people probably working in it, and it grew and grew and grew. And it was very clear that capacity was required to really get the traction that human factors now has really in that industry. But in healthcare, it's like, how do we build that capability? How do we bring people forward so that we have got enough? Because, there's going to be a point where we really will need more people to cover the breadth. So again, it was saying, well, we don't want to put anyone off. People starting or thinking about it, or perhaps come from a different industry and wanting to come into healthcare. How can we support them, not reinvent the wheel all the time? No one should have to start from scratch every time, I think. There's some basics that we've all worked out and we've all done, and we can pull, can't we, really, that I think we're all starting to do. So I think it's I think it'll take off and it'll be useful, and it's starting to grow, isn't it, already?
Absolutely.
So we're just looking at ways of sharing, aren't we, a little bit more broadly and widely. That's what we've got to work out how to do that. But I think it's a positive certainly I will find it positive. And
absolutely. And what I always find interesting is you think who the human factors specialists are, and actually even with some quite like digging, all these other people pop up
Or
and you
pop,
think,
yeah.
blimey, they're in an
There's so many,
organisation.
yeah.
They might be sitting there doing a different job but having
Yep,
a qualification, and they're
yep,
just not being used. And even in my own West Midlands area, so I have a community of practice in the West Midlands region, and there's no requirement to have any sort of human factors qualification to join. The main thing is that you have an interest in human
yeah,
factors and you want to learn and develop. And the number of people that keep popping up is
yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
yeah.
Not all of them have qualifications, but we just seem to keep finding people, which
People,
is absolutely brilliant.
yeah,
I think the challenge is, how do we help those people to actually use their
yeah,
knowledge in a meaningful way within their organizations?
yeah. And I think that's really tricky. And I think that's certainly what I'm trying to do as well at a local level, create this network, hub and spoke. You've got people who hopefully can support those people that have perhaps are on their way to getting a qualification or really
Mm,
seeking to sort of enhance their human factors. And then on the outside, there's people who are interested, who want to apply it. So it's sort of like
mm,
constant sort of onion of people, but bringing everyone in, because everyone
mm.
could and can have a role. And I think the national one that we're trying to set up is a community practice of people who have got that professional qualification or are
Yeah,
well on their way, so that we
yeah.
can become that really strong core that
Mm,
hopefully people can feed into. But like you say, we do need those local and regional sort of hub and spoke, I think,
yeah,
models as well. So yeah, you're much further ahead of that. I'm just in the process of doing that, but I think, yeah, you're much further ahead of that. And then if we can have that central national one, that we can
yeah,
signpost, then that's how I see a lot of my role
yeah.
to some degree now, is signposting, linking people together. But I think I shared that comes from someone long time ago said that. I think that's true. Once you get so far down, don't you, in your career or profession, you probably do know quite a few people, don't you? So you're
Yeah.
just trying to link them to the right people. So
And it's interesting you say that, because I find myself doing that quite a lot.
yeah,
Having conversations with people who are maybe starting out in human factors or are doing qualification, and they say something, they talk about a project or something they're interested in, and I immediately think, oh, I need to put them in touch with.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's that constant just
yeah,
trying to link
yeah,
people up, because I do feel that as a profession, human factors people are generally pretty welcoming, pretty
yeah.
open to sharing, quite a
Agree.
supportive bunch.
Yeah,
And I think if you're coming into that industry, whether you're a new graduate or coming in as a second career, that's quite a nice place to
yeah,
be, to feel that you've got people who've got your back and want you
yeah.
to succeed.
Agree. And I think it is probably one of those professions that you won't find everywhere, that everyone is just wanting to share and
Mm.
support. And yeah, I consider, I think I've said this to you before, like you're just passing the baton. I'm passing through doing human factors in healthcare, like I'll pass the
Yeah,
baton, I'll do my, and I think if we can keep doing that, it'll grow and grow and grow.
yeah,
No one person is going to achieve it all. It's like,
yeah.
but collectively, it's definitely moving forward.
Mm,
um, and it gets a level of momentum, that's there.
mm.
But we do need to. I was going to mention the I word, the impact word. Obviously, we've got to work together on that and demonstrating and showing the impact. But I think we have shown that to some degree.
Mm.
I think there is evidence out there, but yeah, we've got a bit of way to go. We've got some sticky problems still to sort out, I
We
think.
have, but I think that the thing for me that I sort of take heart in is that we're all trying to work at these sticky problems,
Yeah,
and rather now than working at them independently, we've
yeah,
actually come to a point where we've got a collective group where
yeah.
we can work at
Agree.
them together, which
Yeah,
I think for me will help in my practice.
yeah.
But I'd also like to think that those new people coming through will reap the benefits
Yes.
of
Yeah.
whatever we can come up with, whatever we can develop, we can share,
Yeah.
because it's quite a daunting place. And you've alluded to the fact that it can be quite difficult to recruit people into
Mm,
posts. We are seeing more
mm,
posts in healthcare,
mm,
human factors, but it's quite difficult to recruit because there
mm,
aren't a huge amount of people with those skills.
mm.
Or maybe they want to go to other industries. I don't know, but I think if we can create um, an appealing environment, in that there is that
Yes.
network there, I
Yeah.
think certainly if I was coming in new, I'd think, well, at least I've got some support.
Yeah.
Um, Do you think that we're struggling to recruit because there aren't enough people, or is it that healthcare is sort of maybe seen to be quite a scary industry? It's just really hard, really hard.
I don't know. I think rightly so, jobs descriptions should go out and should require someone to have a qualification in human factors,
Yeah.
probably at a master's level, to some degree. And if not, at least support someone,
Yeah.
heading to chartered status. I
Yeah.
think that's what we'd want to see. We wouldn't expect our clinical professionals not to have their chartered registration. As a physio, I had to have it. I would absolutely expect someone who's in a role which influences safety and reliability should equally have that. So I think you're right. I think there's something about that, bringing people through. I don't know. I think it's one of those areas that is, again, where human factors is emerging, and I don't know why, but I ended up in railway that emerged as I was in it. And now I put myself back in the position of healthcare, which is emerging. So I don't know why I just didn't go to one where human factors is really well established. But there you go. It's good. It's been interesting, and I think that either appeals to you or it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think
Agree.
you can either be part of forming and sort of developing human factors and what it can look like in healthcare, and taking what you know from other industries and morphing it. But it has to be morphed because it's not a lift and shift. It can't be in healthcare.
Yeah.
There are very fundamental different goals. But I would also encourage, though, people to think about it who come from other industries. It's incredibly rewarding. It's a great, fascinating people to work with. You would not be bored ever,
No.
and the scope is huge for what human factors and where it can be involved in healthcare. And I'm finding a huge receptiveness to it now, which I think is different from 15 sort of 20 years ago. I think it was very much banging on doors and cold calling, and I'm not finding that so much. I'm finding that even though we might not always align with what we think human factors is, when you have those conversations to start with, generally speaking, people know about it and have heard about it.
Okay.
So that for me is a huge shift. So I don't know. I think we've got some work to do, haven't we, in terms of supporting those that exist in healthcare that want to do more, and supporting those that coming from other industries and going, maybe I wouldn't, maybe I shouldn't. How can we help that transition? But yeah, I think I would completely encourage people to bring their skills and have a go. It is hugely rewarding environment to work in, but not
It
easy
is. No, it's not easy. That I do find that when I talk to people who are in healthcare human factors, there's a certain I don't know, just that there's an enthusiasm there. I can tell that these people genuinely enjoy what they're doing. They light up when they talk about what they're doing, which is a real joy to see. So just touching on some of your own experiences and work that you've done. You mentioned that you love a tool, a methodology.
Oh, I love it. Love a method.
What are the tools and methodologies that you find yourself in your own practice going back to?
Easy, yeah. Oh, I should actually caveat that with I'm a practitioner at the end of the day. So pragmatic use and applied applications, and probably not always pure use of all methods, I would have to say is true. So you always morph them all. But I think a few have surprised me that I've ended up using more than I thought I would in healthcare, which I mentioned the bow tie analysis, because those of you familiar, if you want to look that up, Chartered Institute obviously put a paper out on barrier analysis. Ron McLeod has done some work looking at it from the healthcare perspective, and I think it is really hard because we don't have strong controls, we don't have engineered a lot of the time controls in healthcare. So that method in the way it's intended to be used in its purest form, I would argue that is a bit of a challenge in healthcare. Nonetheless, the components of it, the principles of it, and the visualization of it, I think has started to work for me quite nicely with certain areas of healthcare. I used it in investigations, and I've used it a lot when we look at things like never events, because the fundamental principle of a never event is, well, there are strong controls. So when you use a method that's all about controls, you can start to visually show or challenge the thinking around, well, actually, are they strong? So I found that useful, and I do find the more visual tools useful, because again, you've not always got a lot of time, and you might have very different job roles or different service users around a table. So you need something to get shared views and perspectives very quickly a lot of the time from people who may be clinical, maybe non-clinical. So you've got that real mixed group, and you really want to get everyone on the same page. So I've used a lot of operational, what they call the operational sequence diagrams. So the swim lane diagrams, I think other people might call them. I quite like that because that showcases how healthcare does multiple tasks and different job roles and timeframes. So you get quite a lot out of those. SEEPs is one that I teach as a framework, but it's a mindset, isn't it? And it's not really a tool, but I feel like we've moved a long way with that. We're bringing a lot of people along with the systems thinking by using a visual image again. And I think that's one area I've used. People might know that I've used FRAM, so the functional resonance analysis. Everyone goes, I think with FRAM, but again, it's worked quite well when you bring people with you in developing them. I've found, so particularly for what I call the wicked problems in healthcare, or things that have been looked at a lot and no one's come up with any real, answers. And so I like FRAM from looking at the adaptions and the dependencies and the systems that are a bit more complex, or as I say, people have struggled to get things. So I'm just trying to think what else I've used. Hierarchical task analysis is your bread and butter, isn't it, sort of thing. And
classic.
It's your classic. It's your vintage, isn't it? Vintage human factors, that is. It's I've used some of that as well. But I don't know, I think you get to a point, don't you, where you look at problems and you see problems and you start to think that'll work well. I think at a national level, I did use AXIOMAPs a lot more because I think they showcased really nicely sort of the interactions at different system levels. I think they do work at a trust level, but they show you much more what you can't control, or what what's outside of your control. But so I use quite a lot of things. And I think the area we haven't touched on very much in healthcare is cognition and decision making and workload, mental workload, and that side of things. We haven't really gone there and looking at that in everyday work. So I have used sort of the applied cognitive task analysis methodology to try and do some of that work as well. But I think that's to come probably in the future, because I think that's definitely an area that we need to unpack and see what that looks like.
And if someone is starting their human factors journey in healthcare and have listened to all of the different tools and frameworks and methods that you just mentioned and thought, oh my goodness, where should they start? What would your advice be?
So I think have a look at them. There's good methodology books. I'm not sure whether I should mention, because I don't want to say one and then miss another, but there's some good references. Have you got a reference list? I don't know in your
I can put it in the show notes.
Okay, so there you go. So there's some good reference lists. There's some really good podcasts as well, actually, that are out now on different methodologies that we could perhaps share those as well. And that's what I've started to do locally, sort of try and share where they are. I think read about it, have a look at it. Don't be afraid to have a go, because I think there's huge fear about having a go. And I know I was the same, especially with FRAM. I was like, actually, I was fortunate enough, to work with Eric Holnagle for the first time I did it, so that I felt confident. I know that's a bit of a win.
That's a gift. if we could all work with Eric Holnagle the first time we do FRAM, I think we'd nail it.
Be fine. But I got lucky, and I think but that's what I needed to get the confidence to then go ahead and try and use that method. And that's all I'd say is don't be afraid, just have a go. And if you've got someone around like Fran or someone, tap into the Chartered Institute community practice there. There's opportunities, I think, to put a question and say, has anyone used this method, or would anyone be prepared to support it? Have a go, definitely have a go. I mean, how wrong can it go? I think that you'd be surprised what you can learn from it. And I think some methods work because of the nature of the problem better. I think some methods work just because as individuals we process information or we look at things differently. So some people I know hate certain methods and gravitate to others. I think that's fine too. I don't think we should beat ourselves up about that. So I think what works for you, what works for the problem that you've got at hand, but just have a go and see where you get with it.
I think that's really good advice, to actually try and get people to just have a go and not be too worried about
Yeah.
whether they've done everything exactly as they should, because like you said right at the beginning of the conversation about tools and methodologies, is that, you know, you kind of use them to suit you.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
think we all do that to a
Yeah.
certain degree. Once
Yeah.
we get experience and our confidence, is we sort of work out how they're going to work for us. So not feeling like, well, I don't feel I can do it 100% correctly, so therefore I'm not going to do it
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to
Exactly.
Pascal Carry On about SEEP, she had exactly the same
Oh,
advice,
okay.
as
So, no,
in,
I'm in good company.
yeah, absolutely, just have a
Fantastic.
go.
Yeah.
And you know, that gave me some comfort
Yeah.
that the person who actually helped to develop a framework is saying, just give it a go and don't
Yeah.
worry too much.
Yeah.
You know, so
I think it's reflecting, what did you get out of it
yeah.
at the end? I think that's the other thing I always sort of say, you know, because they do take a little bit of effort. Anything takes effort when it's new to you. So give it a couple of goes before you write it off completely. But if you haven't got something out of it that you didn't know beforehand,
Yeah.
then you probably question it. But if it makes you look at things in a different way, or shows the problem in a different way, or makes it more understandable to have that conversation, you know, around a table with multiple different people from different perspectives, what was the win, what was the gain, you know, then you'll work out what's for you, what's for your problems. I think
that's a great piece of advice. So just a couple of questions to finish on. I'm probably going to put you on the spot here.
Okay,
really.
I'm reading this. I'm feeling a little nervous now.
So you've got huge amounts of experience in the human factors world and have encountered a lot of people on the way, and some of them you've mentioned as we've gone through the conversation. But who is the person or people, there may not be just one, that you really admire in the human factors world?
Oh, wow. Oh, there's so many, aren't there, really? I think, you know, Sue put me on the path. John definitely pushed me up the hill. John was, you know, and I think, you know, the other people along the way that have got to be mentioned is people like Pete Buckle, you know, who was the, you know, the grandfather really, you know, with alongside, what's his grandmother, perhaps, of, I don't know, of healthcare, human factors, but, you know, they're definitely people that were there long before, you know, we came along. So they've started that pathway really. But, you know, there are some phenomenal people, I think, in terms of the way that they've managed to embed it in industries where we weren't before, and have really shone a light on what it can bring, you know, moving forward. And I feel like I don't know about you, but we're just sort of carrying the lanterns along, you know, a little bit further, hopefully. That's what I hope, sort of along the way. But I think, and there's some really good, you know, like I talk about Eric Heidegger, you know, I know his work, you know, there's a lot of other people who are looking at safety and thinking about it in a different way. And I like challenging myself to think, well, does that really fit with what I see, what I do, you know? And I think so people like that, I think, are equally hugely important, because they just make you stop and think, does this make sense practically when you're out in the field? So there's many people I admire along the way.
Some good names you've mentioned there. And lastly, what are the skills or qualities that perhaps you see in other people that you quite envy and think, I aspire to being a little bit more like that?
I don't know. I think it's like 360, isn't it, for yourself? It's like, I think just sometimes being probably a little bit bolder, you know, with your statements and opinion. I'm not, you know, I'm very much reflective, very much a reflector. Step back, need a little bit of time to think, well, how did that work out, sort of thing. I think other people are a lot more bold and so make statements so I think that's it. That would be the message. I think harnessing the reflection and boldness would be great. But those people that I, you know, like I reflect on, who, of course I would, who are, you know, you admire, you know, they've been in it for the long haul. I think that's the other thing, is tenacity, isn't it? This is not going to happen and change quickly. But so having tenacity and staying, but perhaps being a bit bolder. We need to do that.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's been a fascinating
lovely
conversation.
To talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.